So next we're going to have a keynote speaker from Stephanie Anagnoson. In addition to serving on the advisory board of this project, Stephanie is a geologist and the groundwater sustainability manager and flood control manager for more than 210,000 acres within Madera County. And those are all outside of traditional water and irrigation districts. So Stephanie, if you could please join us.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about three things. Why discuss Madera County? What are the challenges that we're facing and what we're tasked with addressing? And then what I consider our Sigma growing pains, which is, I think, the kindest way of putting it if you've read some news coverage on us. I'm going to use three different acronyms, and you know the water industry is loaded with them, so I'll put them up front. Sigma is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. The GSA is the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and the GSP is the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And under Sigma, a law that went into effect in 2014, groundwater sustainability agencies were formed in 2015, 16, and 17, and then they worked on groundwater sustainability plans that were due for critically overdrafted sub-basins in January of 2020. So here we are. Why discuss Madera County? We are in the geographic heart of California. There is a very amusing California Gold episode with Yul Hauser where he toodles around and looks for the geographic center of California, which you would think would be something that was known, but apparently there were rivalries between communities about this. So we produce a lot of almonds, pistachios, grapes, and dairy-related crops. Farm gate value of approximately $2 billion. So our department as a county is really threefold. We engage in watershed, upper and lower management and partner with NGOs who work on tree mortality issues and forest management issues. We manage a flood control agency, and we also manage 3 groundwater sustainability agencies. Let me show you what that looks like. So this is the flatland or valley portion of the county. And the way the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act works is the counties became responsible for every area that no one else wanted to annex. So everything that is white on the map, people call the white areas or sometimes undistricted areas, but that became the county's responsibility. And as you can see, it's a beautiful patchwork quilt. There's gaps, there's holes, there's an east and a west section, and you can't see on this map, but there's actually 3 different sub-basins that cut through the county. 2 are entirely within the county, the Madera Sub-basin and the Chowchilla Sub-basin, and then we have part of what's called the Delta Mendota Sub-basin. So the county's then responsible for these 220,000 acres that people refer to as white area or undistricted area. So one of our farmers has put up a sign. It's the undistricted island, meaning not within the district. So let me give you a sense of what our challenges look like with some visuals. So here is a hydrograph. This is showing what would happen if we did not put projects and management actions into place. So we're talking about on the left-hand side, real data points showing pretty steep groundwater decline, and then the right portion is what happens with groundwater with a model projecting into the future. So that's if we did nothing. Here's what the groundwater budget in the Madera Sub-basin looks like. So we're extracting substantially more than comes through natural recharge from infiltration from streams and canals from precip. So like most water managers, when we have a problem, we look for more water. And in the Central Valley, there certainly is more water available in terms of flood flows. We all want it, very competitive. So we were able to find in our groundwater sustainability plan in the Madera Sub-basin something like 60,000 acre feet that might be available on average per year. It comes in really big gulps, so every 3 or 4 years it would be closer to 180,000 acre feet or 200. We don't have facilities built for that, so we have to build a ton of turnouts and go through a lot of water rights and permitting to get there. But that's what's bringing in extra supply. And then we have the demand management portion, which is met with land repurposing and then putting the farmers who are within the county groundwater sustainability agency on budgets or allocations. So then you see with the projects combined with the management actions of demand reduction that you have stabilization in groundwater models. So that is the science behind it, which is probably ultimately the most important, but now we're going to talk about some of the growing pains, which tend to be less scientific and maybe more political. So this is, I don't actually own a TV, but because it would have been quite a shock to see yourself on the news, right? But this is from a month or two ago. It looks like it's 95 degrees, and there is a lot of really angry people at the Board of Supervisors when we went to talk about penalties for going over your allocation. So let's talk about what we have found to be the growing pains. So Ms. Marcus alluded to a lot of this, kind of on the flip side of victim mentality, but there is just an insane amount of scapegoating. And who is scapegoating whom? Everybody is scapegoating everybody. So it's a commodity group blaming a different commodity group. It's the Madera Sub-basin being blamed by adjacent sub-basins. Within the sub-basin itself, it's people in the districts who sometimes get surface water blaming those who are the undistricted or white area as taking all of their water. It is everybody blaming everybody. Perhaps it is everybody blaming the county more of, and one of my hobbies is Googling random things, so one time I did Google country songs and the word county, and it turns out there is a lot of blaming of the county. So the county is just the man. It's very popular to blame the county. Often scapegoated, and really, I get it, but hard. So another issue that we face is that whenever we develop policies and do a lot of outreach and ask people where they are from, the majority are from somewhere that is other than Madera County. So they're weighing in on these issues, but they don't live in the county. Now, sometimes they just live one county away, but sometimes they may live a distance away. So that is a big challenge. You have meetings, particularly with Zoom, where you can attend from a fair distance and weigh in. As Isaiah weighed in on, we also have some challenges with satellite measurement, I think mostly around trust issues. There are, most GSAs, including us, are not able to meter everything. And of course, we inherited all this land that wasn't managed by other people, so we would be almost starting from scratch with metering. Is it possible? Yes, perhaps if we ramp up meter production, but there is also a thing going on where many larger operations may have unpermitted wells, right? And if they know that we're measuring only by meters, that would actually incentivize drilling wells without permits. So satellite measurement provides a way of double checking. The fourth bullet about rates is really an interesting one. So because we inherited this land that did not typically have a rate for water other than a PG&E bill for pumping, the notion that you were paying for water or paying for projects that were mitigating damage to the sub-basin, whether it's taking land out of production or or domestic well mitigation, that was a bit of a foreign concept. So you will see a lot of news coverage on this notion that rates for white area growers are just not accepted. And Sigma does require that we use a Prop 218 process. And in California, what that means is that you're asking people if they want to pay. That might have an obvious answer, right? Most people don't want to pay more. And Prop 218 in California works for utilities that have large numbers of ratepayers, right? 30,000 ratepayers, 100,000 ratepayers, where you're going to have a really hard time getting a majority protest. But if you have a couple hundred ratepayers, it's pretty easy to get a majority protest. So when we did our rate studies, we did 3 of them for the 3 subbasins. One of them did fail because it was a small number of growers, and it was fairly easy to get a majority protest. So that subbasin doesn't have funds to pay for projects right now. One challenge is that the county is typically a place you can go to check out a library book or get a permit when you're building a deck, but it's not been a water management, certainly not for this amount of acres. So we don't have those relationships with people that an irrigation district does, where you can call someone and say, hey, what are you doing? Get that pump out of there, knock it off. We don't have that relationship. We are building it, but it's slow going. And then lastly, I do think there will be a time in the San Joaquin Valley where most agencies have an allocation. I think how quickly we get there depends a lot on feedback from the state with groundwater sustainability plans. But this notion of farming to an allocation, to a water budget that decreases over time, that has a learning curve. That is not an easy thing to do. And all of the work that you all are doing really supports that, but it is hard. Thank you. I think maybe I gave up a little time, but I'm good with that.
We can take a couple minutes to see if there are any questions for Stephanie or from our last technical session on sustainable ag systems. And if we don't get Dax back online, we'll just move right along.
There it is.
Stephanie, the satellite technology that you referenced, is that being done by NASA? Who is doing that satellite work?
So we have a product that uses the CBAL, the Surface Energy Balance Algorithm for land, called ERAWatch. We had hoped that we would be able to use OpenET. It doesn't seem like it's quite there for us. And of course, there's other people who are using Land IQ in the valley right now. I'm not sure the brand matters, though. It seems like a lot of the mistrust is because, well, we've met with lots of growers, and we'll look at their land, and we'll look at different images, and we'll be able to identify so many different things where they're like, oh yeah, I have a distribution uniformity issue, or oh, that's where there's low pressure, and oh, the vegetation is less here. But then there's almost always like a little thing that we can't explain, and that seems like that's the trigger that doesn't work.
Following up on this, we just discussed this in class last week. Fundamentally, how do you use a measurement that clearly isn't precise to then set limits or penalties? I love to use the speed limit analogy in all of my teachings, and there the radar gun isn't precise in measuring the speed of a particular driver, and so in California we're lucky to have somewhat lenient police where if I'm driving 72 in a 70 mile per hour zone, I'm not penalized because there is about a 10% tolerance zone. Mm-hmm. Do you have a tolerance zone on your ET side when you set your limits?
We We did in a previous version of the resolution that adopted penalties, but in the current one, there is not. We do allow people to use meters, though, if they're pre-inspected to make sure they're installed correctly and they do some either calibration or flow testing. So that seems like the option. But yeah, it's a super interesting place to work, right, with allocations, because you have to have a penalty or the allocation doesn't work. But all of the ways of measuring are not perfect.
So I have a question for you, or maybe for Felicia. She didn't get any questions. She filibustered. In today's edition of Aquafornia or whatever from the Water Education Foundation, there's an article from the Sacramento Bee saying that the Department of Water Resources isn't prepared to do all it needs to do to implement and enforce Sigma. And just as somebody who watches policy, I thought, like, oh my God, everything falls to them if the agencies don't do what they're supposed to. So I'm just curious if you have any reaction to that observation, either one of you, because it's a tall order to implement Sigma.
I think that if DWR, and it has found plans to be inadequate and kicks that over to the state board, and the state board steps in and is sufficiently, for lack of a better word, punishing, that we will all get in line. But the fact that that has not happened yet means that people really wonder if the resources are available. You want this?
No, I agree with that. It's an issue of timing. I mean, I think DWR, as I said earlier, has done a really good job. I'm looking at Camyar, who can also speak to this later on. It's a hard thing, and you end up needing more staff if you end up having to do more. So I intentionally kept my staff at the water board small. I haven't seen that article, so now I have to read it. Oh, no, I can intentionally keep it small in the water board because I didn't want to transmit that we wanted to go be the overlord and take over, and we didn't. And what I told those 10 people was, your job is to go out. I didn't say go drinking, because I had been turned in for suggesting that when I was at EPA to the IG's office. That's why I start talking about wine and coffee, just, you never know. But so I said, I want you to go out and just follow what's happening, be helpful to the people who want you to be helpful, know what's going on, so that when you do have to step in, you're stepping in the right place. And you're stepping in the place where everybody else will say, oh yeah, they really had to go there first. And that may seem obvious, but again, from history being both regulated, back when I ran a public works department, and as a regulator, folks sometimes are opportunistic in their enforcement, which really hurts the whole effort. The smartest thing is to target folks that everybody else knows need to be targeted. But to the extent that we hit the point in the system, we're not there yet, when folks can truly be dinged because there's this iterative process going on, then the question, DWR will refer folks to the water board, and that's been more collaborative than some people think, and then the water board will have to staff up. So the idea of saying we're not big enough now is by design, but hopefully we won't have to grow.